Greetings, and welcome to Beatles Stuffology, where two old friends sit about and talk BS, Beatles stuff, with exactly as much authority as you would expect from two people who are apparently allergic to any kind of research. In other words, it's another episode. I am JG McCrory, and as always, I'm here with my co-host, Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. As you've slightly varied the opening, I thought I'd vary my response slightly too.
I appreciate that. It's always good to keep things slightly fresh. We're back and we are discussing the next track on With the Beatles. So that means this week we are going to be talking about Till There Was You. So, without further preamble, shall we dive into it? What do you think of it?
Well, I suspect this is one of those episodes where we're probably not going to be talking about the song very much because what is there to say?
Not a vast amount this time, I would have to say. It's a curious piece. It's very chintzy. It's very sort of schmaltzy, and it's well performed within a sort of list of parameters, I suppose. You know, McCartney sings it very well. George Harrison's got a really, really good guitar solo. He knocks that out of the park. Very casually, in a way that isn't necessarily his kind of modus operandi at this point in the band, but he kind of really does a good job on it. Ringo's bongos playing isn't the best thing in the world I've ever heard, but you know, it's very competent.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you potentially inaccurate but interesting piece of trivia. It was played quite a lot. They did play it apparently. Bear in mind, this is going from setlist.fm, reliability of which, user inputted, information, so could be all over the place. But, it sounds appropriate in February 1962 that it was first played at the Oasis Club. It sounds very, very appropriate. And most recently played in August 1964 at a convention centre called Convention Centre in Las Vegas. And you know what? It kind of puts me in mind of Elvis, that sort of Las Vegas period Elvis, and the kind of song that he might have sung. Wouldn't surprise me if he did, to be perfectly honest. It's fine. Did you use the word chintzy?
Yes.
Yeah, but it's clearly one that they liked playing, which is really odd. Whether that's because it changes the tempo in the set. Whether it's something that gives McCartney an opportunity to sing something on his own while Lennon takes a bit of a break. Remember, they played this on some really big occasions as well, didn't they? Played it on the Ed Sullivan Show, the Royal Variety Performance, two of the most famous performances in Beatles history. And they played it. Frankly, it wouldn't surprise me if during rehearsals they thought about playing it on the rooftop at Abbey Road. They seem to like it so much.
I think this is one of the songs that, we've mentioned this a few times in the podcast before, so sorry if this is slightly repetitious, but I think this is definitely one of the songs which is included in the set to provide variety. It's definitely there to appeal to an audience who aren't necessarily going to be into kind of the more rock and roll music or whatever. This is definitely what Lennon would call Paul's granny shit. And, that's fair enough. That's exactly what it is. But I think there's definitely a sense that this is here for that kind of thing. So if it's being played at the Royal Variety Performance or something, it's something which is going to very directly appeal to that kind of older audience who aren't going to be kind of invested in the more sort of teenage end of the music spectrum. It's definitely one which I think allows them to show off their versatility. I think that goes without saying. But it's also one which I think kind of shows off their musical competence as well. Everything is, I used the word competent before, kind of damning with faint praise. But it is very competent. McCartney's voice is really good on the recorded version, and it's a live at the BBC version as well, or anthology, and it's basically pretty much as is on the album, which is pretty impressive. I mean, again, like I mentioned George Harrison's guitar solo, but that's not an easy thing to just kind of knock out, and the live recordings of this are pretty much identical to the recorded version. So there's not a great sense in which they are using the studio to up their kind of technical quotient. They can do this, and they can do it live, and they can do it pretty much without having to stop and think about it. And I mean, competent is damning with faint praise, but it's not, it's not without its virtue.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, played live more than Please Please Me, wow, for example. and Love Me Do as well, just for some sort of comparable statistics. So, which would seem to back that point of view up. And it is only McCartney in the band who would have sung this song as well. I mean, it's not a Ringo song. It's not as juvenile or as, something like Octopus's Garden or Yellow Submarine, but neither is it Boys. So it does kind of fit in with what he might sing. Can't imagine George with his sort of nasally vocal managing it, and Lennon wouldn't have touched it with a barge pole, but would have been quite happy to have sat back while McCartney does it. But then there's an interesting point, because of course you sort of think of the context of these songs quite a lot, and we do talk a lot about various contexts. Of course, we're at a period where the Rolling Stones are starting to develop their career, and of course they have this reputation as being, the nasty ones, as it were, the ones who are perhaps a little bit more street cred. But then, and songs like this are often used as evidence of why the Beatles were the nice boys, and When I'm 64 and Obli Dee Obli Da, and so on and so forth. And yet, it's 2 years since they last played at Hamburg, and Hamburg was the sex and drugs and rock and roll, possibly more than any other band in history in such a condensed period of time. So it's all about the versatility, and it's all about, look, we can do this, we can do, Twist and Shout, and we can do Till There Was You. Now, admittedly, even when they're doing Twist and Shout, they're doing it, of course, in their suits and with a little bow afterwards. So, they are very conscious of the fact that they are a commercial entity, and it's about being as successful and as big in a shorter space of time as possible. So, although I'm not a particular fan of Till There Was You, and I've never sat through a performance of The Music Man, I'm unlikely to sit through a performance of The Music Man, the musical that it comes from, there's clearly something in it that appeals to them, and who am I to doubt the judgment of the group that apparently they called the Fab Four?
Well, I mean, we're here to doubt. That's the point of this podcast, isn't it? We're doubting all the way. But I do think it's an interesting one in terms of the way that it's performed. For some reason, every time I came to think of this when I was listening to it prior to recording this episode, every time I thought, I must remember to sit down and listen to Till There Was You, I always ended up with the melody of And I Love Her in the back of my head. And it made me think that maybe And I Love Her is just a much better version of this song, because I think, in honesty, I'm not really convinced that this is a very good song. It's being covered about 17 bajillion times. There's just so many cover versions of this song, not all of which postdate the Beatles, so it's not like it's one that can necessarily be laid at their feet. The musical, I think, is 1957 or something like that. I think Music Man was originally released, but there's a couple of cover versions which exist prior to this one. If Wikipedia is to be believed, it's Peggy Lee's version that Paul McCartney was aware of. But it's out there, and people are covering it long before the Beatles get their hands on it. It would be impossible to assume that the fact that they've covered it hasn't added to the song's popularity, of course. But it was still out there, and yet for all the cover versions that are out there, none of them are really that great. And there's some big artists who have covered it. Obviously, mentioned Peggy Lee, that goes without saying, but like Ray Charles couldn't find that much in it. It's stylistically it's very different from the Beatles version as you would expect, but it's kind of it's trying to spin hay into gold, and if Ray Charles can't manage it, I'm bloody sure that Rod Stewart isn't going to manage it at any point in his career. It's just like there's so many versions out there, and they're all either basically the same kind of chintz that the Beatles have got, or they try and stretch the song, like Ray Charles's version, so far out of shape that it's barely recognizable as the same song. And I just, like, after about 5 or 6 different versions, it becomes very difficult to want to listen to any more of them, because they're all basically coming up against the same limitation. And I think that limitation is that ultimately it's just not that great a song.
Oh, it would be interesting. Oh, no, it wouldn't be interesting. I take that back completely. I suppose if we were to... how did you change the introduction to about 2 people who basically can't be asked to do the research they really ought to be doing?
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose technically what we really ought to have done is to at least read through the plot of The Music Man to then work out where the song comes and where it fits in, and therefore possibly whether or not contextually whether it is a significant song in that respect. Because, it's a little unfair sometimes to pull a song out of a musical if it's meant to conform to part of the narrative. I know, you can do it. There are lots of sort of standalones. But of course, what we're doing is we're thinking about it in relation to perhaps how they would have used it in their live set, but then also how it fits into the running order of this particular album towards the end of side one, between Little Child and Please Mr. Postman, both of which are pretty up-tempo, rocking songs in their own way. So there is that change of pace. There is that sense that they are throwing in something even now just to kind of have that little bit of variety. Now, whether or not they needed it is another thing entirely. It's just one of those, like when we get onto the second side, we'll probably, Devil in a Heart as well is another song that feels out of place with some of the songs around it, and feels out of place in the Beatles canon as well, really. So there will be more of this to come, more of this kind of thing, as it were. So I don't know, it's just, I think you have to kind of look at it and think, is McCartney still doing that kind of thing? Perhaps in his live set. He is still throwing in lots of variation. He's currently sort of doing his world tour. Some of the gigs in America have been like 3-hour monstrous affairs, playing 40 songs and having a whale of time doing it. There's got to be variation in that, and he is playing quite a wide mix of songs. So it's just something of the natural performer in him, and it's just sort of something of a miracle that he continued to do that. He continued to write. I'm sort of looking again at the track listing of Tug of War the other day, which is a McCartney album from the early 80s that I got a lot of affection for, and alongside things like Here Today and Wonderlust, which are really wonderfully crafted songs, you of course get a few slightly weirder things, and I'm going to throw in that is Ballroom Dancing on that album?
Ballroom Dancing is on that album, it sure is.
Yeah, which is another one of those oddities. But there's actually Take It Away is it just, again, it's you put Here Today against Take It Away, and you just think, good on you for actually being brave enough just to go, what, I want to show off all of the skills that I've got, so here we go. And Till There Was You is that, linked to the fact that it was probably one of those songs that he learned in the McCartney household. So, good luck to him, basically, is what I'm trying to say. I don't particularly like it, but it's not there for me.
No, well, that's also true as well. And, one thing we can say about, the first side of this album is that it does have that variety to try and keep people coming back. And, the other thing to bear in mind, I suppose, at this point, which is, 63, 64, albums are bloody expensive. And so investing in an album, you really had to encourage people to have that, desire to buy that product. You could pick up a single for not too much. That was all right. That was probably within most teenagers' purview. But actually investing in an album and having that kind of financial outlay for a piece of wax, that's not nothing. And so if you want to encourage people to put their hands in their pockets, it might well be that you throw in a couple of tracks that maybe somebody's parents might like, because maybe that would encourage them to help you buy it or whatever. But if at the very least, if it's teenagers who are going out and buying the album, putting that extra bit of variety in gives the encouragement for people to go out and spend their kind of hard-won cash on it. And I don't want to do a whole kind of, back in the day kind of routine, but, it was a significant factor. Buying an album was expensive. You couldn't go to the library to borrow it. You couldn't, obviously, if one person got it, you couldn't go out and tape it off a friend or whatever at this point. That wasn't practically accessible technology. So you had to really, really want something to have that kind of financial outlay. And for all that, I think particularly side one of this album just fades away to pretty much nothing with the last two songs that we've discussed, Don't Bother Me and Little Child, and then with this. You know, again, like you said, we're not necessarily the target audience for that. And the song does have a function to play within the context of the album. We'll probably talk about this more when we do the overall album sort of coverage. But, you know, it is worth bearing that in mind. And the live performance of it, the constant live performance of it, also gives that familiarity that people pick up the album and go, oh yeah, well, I saw them do that on the TV the other night, or I saw them do that on you know, the radio. I heard them listen, you know. That gives the album another hook. That encourages people to go out and buy the album and spend the money. Obviously, that benefits the band, but it's also something that EMI would be very conscious of as well. They can make money out of this.
Well, then you sort of potentially get into the conversation about because there's quite a few songs on here which would have appeared on live performances. You know, Please Mr. Postman, Roll Over Beethoven, for example. You know, more so than some of the originals. You know, then you get into the physical memento of a live experience. You could have that sort of as a conversation, and the fact that they are basically saying, "Here you go. Here's a reminder of what we are like as a live band." You also get into potentially the conversation about the fact that we're talking about 1963, for goodness sake, and yeah, rock and roll is still an evolving art form. And there is no template for what should go on a successful album. And, you know, show tunes were popular. We know from previous conversations that we've had that some of the biggest selling albums of the late 50s, early to mid 60s were soundtrack albums. So why not? Why not have something from a musical? It's clearly popular. And who's to know how 14 rock and roll tracks, you know, would have actually sounded to the audience at that time? So the variety just kind of makes sense. You know, it's difficult to judge it from 2022 eyes in ears, probably more than the eyes. I think that's safe to say. You know, in terms of what we might expect to hear, you know. People would be like, yeah, people might have one or two albums in their collection. That's it. Their parents might have some soundtracks, maybe a classical, maybe I don't know, insert name of person with their orchestra here. They are creating the template. I think it's almost as simple as that. You know, they're making the rules that other people can then decide to follow or to adjust. And chances are that outside, say, the Ramones, you're probably not going to find that many albums that are all one particular tempo, one particular type of song. Because let's face it, Ramones fans, that's true.
I don't think Ramones fans would argue that point, would they? I mean, the other thing about this, like you know, obviously you're correct in saying that, and once the Stones kind of get their first couple of albums out of the way, once the Kinks get their first kind of album out of the way, you know, that kind of template is there. But there is, I mentioned sort of the competence of the song. I think it's just worth mentioning that generally speaking, when I've talked about chords and the way that songs are constructed, it's usually in the context of saying something like, well, you know, like there's only like 5 chords in this, or there's only 6 chords. It's amazing how well there are 32 chords in this song. It's absolutely insane how it's one of those things, like, you know, you can just by looking at that, you can tell the immediate difference between, you know, a song which has been specifically crafted for something like a musical, a professional songwriter, Tin Pan Alley, that neck of the woods, and, you know, these guys who stand up on stage and kind of knock it out. And when they're writing their own songs, they aren't writing songs which have that degree of complexity. They will, but they're certainly not doing it in 1963, 1964. And that, again, it's one of the things that I suppose... when I use the word competence, but there is a sort of breezy effortlessness to this that kind of belies just how complex all that stuff. It's like a lot of them are kind of like diminished versions or seventh versions as well as the major chords or whatever. But even so, it's a lot to get in, and it sounds kind of breezy and effortless. And that's one of McCartney's great skills, is taking something which is actually really difficult and just making it seem incredibly kind of just tossed off, or just like there's no effort involved in it at all. I think it's one of the reasons I can't possibly refer to him as being underrated in any way, but I think it's one of the reasons that he's maybe underestimated in some way, because he has that skill. And this song is a perfect example of that. I don't think it's a particularly great song, not by any stretch of the imagination, but the sheer ability to be able to do that is certainly worth drawing attention to.
Okay, so I've just had one of those moments where I've just remembered something, and I think you'll like this one.
Okay.
I've been watching quite a few interviews with and performances by Neil Innes recently, and of course,
I'm already smiling.
Yeah, absolutely, just wonderful things. Anyway, and of course, in the Ruttles film, alongside at the Royal Variety performance, which of course one of the celebrated performances of this song is Royal Variety performance. We've got With a Girl Like You, which obviously sung up towards the the royal box. So, and actually, With a Girl Like You is a much better song. I mean, there are several ones like that, and the one that I'll come back to much later in this series is Let's Be Natural, which is just one of the most beautiful songs ever written by anyone. Amazing that it was written by a parody band. But With a Girl Like You fits really, really nicely with Till There Was You. Wonderful, wonderful song. And that's the one I'd much rather listen to.
Yeah, I'm definitely not going to argue with that. I mean, I love With a Girl Like You, obviously. I mean, I love literally everything about the Ruttles. That goes without saying. This is slightly off topic, I know, and I know we'll talk about the Ruttles again and again as we go through this series, but I just want to also re-emphasize that what a pleasure it is to listen to Neil Innes talk. Just like hearing him being interviewed and just hearing he's incredibly modest, just the most beautiful soul in the world. He's just the most gorgeous man, and the world is so much less for not having him in it anymore. But it's wonderful that there are so many interviews with him, so many recordings, and of course it's just a blast to listen to him. Yeah. He's fabulous and wonderful. And With a Girl Like You is kind of one of those examples of more or less what I was just talking about, actually. It seems so effortless to write a parody like that, but it's unbelievably difficult to do it and for it to not just sound like corny or whatever. And, like Weird Al can do it as well. There's plenty of other people out there. It's not something which is completely unique to Neil Innes, but he has such a precision about the way that he does it. There's so much attention to detail. There's so much genuine class involved in the way that he does it, but it's so effortless. It just comes across as having taken no time, no energy at all, and it's glorious when you realize just how much has gone into it.
I do feel obliged to point out that Wikipedia would like me to believe that With a Girl Like You is a parody of If I Fell. It may well be, but the fact that it's the kind of song that it is and it's in the Royal Variety performance, I'm sorry.
It suggests otherwise.
It's got to have links with this one, and I'd much rather spend half an hour talking about With a Girl Like You, to be honest. Although that would then, of course, encompass the conversation about Eric Idle's pathetic attempts to mime playing the bass throughout that film.
Oh yeah, he's not a great mime artist. It's fair to say. No, absolutely. It's. I think when it comes to those songs as well, saying it's like a parody of one thing is probably fairly limited. Like Piggy in the Middle is obviously I Am the Walrus. That goes without saying. But like things like With a Girl Like You, like that's more kind of a genre parody than necessarily something which can be narrowed down to a specific track. So If I Fell, absolutely. But you're right. Like the whole performance at the Royal Variety, then of course it's going to mirror this as well. So, but again, that's kind of the skill of Neil Innes, that he can write a song and it can have 5 or 6 different songs that you could go, oh well, no, it's a parody of that one, or it's a parody of this one. That's the skill of the man.
Yeah, absolutely. God bless you, Neil. God bless you. Yeah, I'd be interested. The other thing I've been doing a lot of, and again, it's something that will crop up further down the line. I've been rewatching quite a lot of the Analogues live performances because I'm sort of slightly obsessed with just how good they are as a live band. I've started to see a few more crop up of some of the earlier, more simple, more straightforward songs. I mean, I would be very interested to see, whether or not they would be able to expand their full range. And with some slight sadness, I saw they are doing a gig in the UK at some point, but it's something like a Monday night about 200 miles away from where I live, and very, very expensive to get to. But I think it would be fantastic to see a band like that. It's not a tribute band, but a band who seeks to mimic the sound of the Beatles accurately. How they go about the full range of songs, because they're brilliant at the later stuff, the more complicated stuff, but to hear them do some of the simple stuff. And by the way, last thing on this promise, did you know that there are Ruttles tribute bands?
Oh, that's glorious. That's that in and of itself just makes me incredibly happy. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, keep calm and Barry warm. Oh God, yeah. Love him, love him to death. It's funny because like talking in a vague attempt to drag us back to what we're nominally discussing. When it comes to cover versions, which obviously this is, the Music Man itself is kind of. We were discussing this before we started recording, and I said it's kind of a forgotten musical, and you pointed out, well, but it's on Broadway with Hugh Jackman. So, okay, forgotten.
In 2020.
In 2020.
In 2020.
Yeah. That year, which was known for all those live performances.
Yeah.
So, forgotten is perhaps not quite the right word. And given that this song has been covered so many times, obviously this one part of it manages to carry on. But it's also a musical, which is very much kind of... Oh, I was going to say forgotten again. It's nobody's first call. Somebody says like, "Oh, name a couple of musicals." Maybe they'll say Les Miserables. Maybe they'll say Phantom or Oklahoma or South Pacific or something. Nobody says, "Oh, The Music Man." It's very much kind of down the list of potential sort of sources. Yeah. And yet this one song persists from it in the literally hundreds of cover versions which exist on Spotify. This is the one song which kind of constantly comes up. And it's kind of interesting to see that cover version just be so popular when everything else about that music is kind of, that musical rather, is kind of faded away to, at best kind of background noise. Maybe there'll be a revival or something or one, whatever. But it's never going to be like a top tier kind of thing. And it's just kind of interesting to absorb how that kind of cultural ephemera, that sort of cultural flotsam manages to kind of bounce its way through the ages when the source material is very much sort of faded away to well, not nothing, but very much faded away into the background at least.
I think the important thing from my point of view is that it's not too long now, into maybe a year, 18 months, until you get to the point where instead of covering songs like this, they, in particular Paul, are writing their own versions, and one heck of a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned If I Fell, which is unquestionably a better version of this song. Even things like kind of I'll Follow the Sun, which I really like. We'll talk about that obviously when we get to it, but I think I'll Follow the Sun is a cracking little song. But again, I think you can very much see, this kind of song as that's antecedents. There's definitely roots there stylistically in terms of the way that the guitar works. There's plenty of examples of this kind of stuff throughout their career, and having been very judgmental about this song as is my wont, it's I think it's fair to be judgmental in this song because we have so many examples of something similar being done, just done much better.
I mean, what would be interesting would be then to, if we could be bothered, to see if there are any performances where they were doing... I mean, If I Fell was played quite a lot live by the Beatles. I don't know whether or not I'll Follow the Sun was, but to see if they actually end up having performances where 2 or 3 of those sorts of songs ended up in them. I mean, I doubt it very much, bearing in mind that their live act was roughly 25 to 30 minutes. They probably wouldn't want to be varying the pace of it too much. But, just to see what in, say, 64, 65, 66 exactly did make up those Beatles performances.
Yeah, that would be very interesting, but it would involve research.
Well, it involves browsing on the internet.
Well, that's adjacent to research.
It is, yeah.
Bing it, everyone.
Yeah, I haven't used Bing since about ever.
Never.
But yeah, I'm sure if you want to stick up for it, you go ahead.
I'm not feeling the urge right at this exact moment.
No. Fair enough. I don't know about you, but I think we've managed to do quite well for a song where you briefly brought up the variety in terms of chords. Great, fair enough. It's if you like, it's the with the Beatles, Dig a Pony. If you want to go for that comparison. Was that the one that George Harrison complained about the number of chord changes in?
I don't know. Was it?
Well, we could just pretend that it is and go from there, which is fine. I mean,
that works for me.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, I mean, it does have quite a lot of chord changes in, and he complained about how difficult it was to play. And then, ironically, I was listening to Wah Wah the other day, and Wah Wah actually sounds like it's just as difficult, if not more so.
Yeah, I'll bet it is.
Yeah, George, you hypocrite.
Well, yeah, he'll be wounded. Wounded, I tell you. Shall we give this a score then?
Oh, it's a 5. Come on, don't beat around the bush.
That's slightly generous. I was going to say 4.5, but okay, sure, all right, 5. I can probably live with 5.
Yeah.
If I say 4.5, you're going to ask me to justify the half point.
I am. Yeah.
Ringo's Bongos take it down half a point.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It's not as bad. I mean, I always defend Ringo, but on this occasion, I'm sorry, Mr. Starr. It's not your finest. It's not your finest.
But then it's not meant to be.
It's functional. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. Right,
yeah.
Fine. Okay. Right. Yeah. 4.5. I'll give it 4.5.
Yeah. Why not 4.75 though?
Because that's just taking the piss.
Yep.
Okay. Good. 4.5. It is. Lovely. Okay. Well, we have something slightly novel for us in this episode, which means we've had an email from one of our listeners. Thank you, our listener. In this case, it is Patrick Connor, who has emailed in with the following. He says, "Greetings. I've just finished listening to the It Won't Be Long episode and enjoyed it very much. Thank you very much. I wanted to weigh in with a few thoughts inspired by what you guys said. Point 1, you talked about how there were 27 takes and yet how odd this seems given that it's a straightforward song in terms of its structure and arrangement. That surprised me as well, and then something else you mentioned provided some insight. You talked about how this was never played live and also brought up the classic idea that while you have your whole life to get ready for your first album, you then need to scramble to make the second. Assuming that this wasn't a song that was left over from Please Please Me, such as Hold Me Tight, then they are still basically learning this song as they write and record it. I've written and recorded music as a hobby for 40 years, and I'm working on a song just to record it, as opposed to also rehearsing it a lot for a live show. Then it takes me longer to get finished, and if I don't have the context of having been working on it for a while, which... Yes.
Yeah.
Point 2 was, I agree that this should have been part of...
Because there's 3 points. If you read the next two, I'd have forgotten the first one, such as... Well, first and foremost, thank you very much for accusing us of providing insight. I really do appreciate that. That's a most welcome piece of feedback. Yeah, you're right. And I suppose, actually, at this point, I should own up to the fact that I have now watched... the whole of the Peter Jackson oeuvre, and you can actually see how the songs develop in that as they that's a fair point, and that does provide a look at how the songs develop in the studio themselves, and they're basically learning it. So fair point. I'm quite happy to admit that I've not sat in a recording studio, that I am just like Joe Mugg carping on from the sidelines, but yeah, it's interesting to get that kind of feedback, and I'm assuming that this is an email that you've selected from the many that we've had so far.
Yeah, naturally, obviously, from the bulging bag of one email. Yes, absolutely. Patrick's second point, I agree that this should have been part of the live show. It is such an infectious song. Like you said, I could picture the bow after the vocal ending. Well, you're Mr. Bow, but yeah, I entirely agree. Yeah, I think this would be a fantastic song to play live.
But let's get on to the controversial one, though.
Okay. Point 3. With regard to your ranking system, I've done a lot of Beatles ranking and read and listen to a lot of it as well. The Big Beatles Sort Out podcast has been really fun to listen to. While it's all in good fun and all that, I've come to realise that my problem with ranking systems is that they don't account for context. I can apply certain criteria and conclude that Strawberry Fields Forever is a 10 out of 10. Yet, I don't want to hear that song all the time. Sometimes I'd rather listen to It Won't Be Long, even though by many measures it's not as strong a song. Why? Because of context. I have a playlist called Joyful Beatles, and that includes songs like It Won't Be Long, 8 Days a Week, She Loves You, and When I'm in a Certain Mood. Those are the songs I want to hear. In that moment, those songs rank higher than Strawberry Fields, A Day in the Life, Something, or any other classically considered top Beatles songs. If anything, the rankings for me now come down to deciding what I want on my Joyful Beatles list. Thank You Girl, for example, did not make that playlist, although it is quite joyful. And the internal rankings of, with this type of song, what do I like best, has become more interesting to me. Again, having said that, have fun with your rankings and I will enjoy hearing them.
Well, okay. Yes, I think there are many problems with ranking systems. So I'm quite happy to agree with that. I also think that Something, although it is the most streamed Beatles song on Spotify, is hugely overrated. However, I'm firmly of the opinion, and this is sort of up there in terms of opinions with the multiverse. Okay, so please bear that in mind, that every song is the best song ever for 15 minutes. At some point, contextually, someone, somewhere, will be thinking that whatever song is the best song ever. For me, at the moment, I think the best Beatles song, or certainly the one that I want to listen to the most, I don't know why, is Sexy Sadie. I'm listening to that a lot at the moment and it's running through my head. It's a brilliant song. Give me another couple of weeks and I'll have moved on to something else. So yeah, completely agree. Rankings are shall we say, an inefficient and inaccurate way of dealing with something that is primarily subjective, but they're also a little bit of fun and allow me to rib you every so often about your 0.5s.
Yeah, well, I'm quite happy to be ribbed of 0.5. I have no problem with you calling me out of that whatsoever. It's good to get pulled up on these things from time to time. You know, have somebody say, well, why? Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I really enjoy doing the rankings. I think it's terrific fun. And that's all it is. It's just good fun to have the opportunity to balance things against each other. And, you know, it's not a science. It's not anything other than... really an excuse to give us a reason to come round to talk about the song that we're supposed to be talking about when we get to an end of the episode. That's kind of its principal function. But it's also just fun. And, you know, if it makes you think about a song in a slightly different way, if it does push a different context onto you, I think that's fine as well. And, I think Patrick has a fair point that, sometimes you want to listen to, a sprawling psychedelic epic, and sometimes you want to listen to a toe-tapping little tune that just gets stuck in your head. And, sometimes using a number to push those two things up against each other and see how they juxtapose is good fun. So, yeah, absolutely.
Strawberry Fields, 10 out of 10? Well, interesting. Okay. Yeah.
That'll be a discussion for another day.
Yeah.
Look forward to that one.
There are some sacred cows sometimes that need to... Is that the metaphor? I couldn't work out in my brain whether it was sacred cows or golden geese. But whichever way, there are received wisdoms, there you go, that'll do, that I think sometimes need to be challenged. Orthodoxy, if you will, that needs to be revised.
I, for one, am very much looking forward to defending Mr. Moonlight. That's all I can say. Anyway, thanks, Pat. Very much appreciate your email. And we look forward to getting some more and discussing them as well. Okay, fine. Then you can contact us by email. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com. We're on Twitter @Beatles_ology. And you can find more of my writing about TV, movies, music, and a whole bunch of other stuff at www.jgmacquarie.scot. Please like, rate, and review us on whatever podcatcher you're using so that more people can find the show. Next episode, it's going to be another cover version. So we are going to be talking about Please, Mr. Postman. But until then, keep listening.